second to just let you know that this is going to be recorded, and we'll share that recording with you after this evening's presentation. So good to see everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, so just a few other reminders before we jump into our content honoring everyone's time. You're going to be muted during the presentation, but there's going to be a question and answer session at the end, and that'll be a time that if you do want to share any questions directly, you'll be able to unmute yourself at that time. Please, at any time, add any questions that you have into the chat. There will be a couple of times during the presentation that I'm going to ask you to put some things into the chat, so make sure that you're finding on your screen those chat controls and you're able to put comments in when I ask you some questions. And then at any time as I'm presenting, if you have questions, please add those into the chat. We'll be addressing your questions at the end of the webinar tonight. There's also some emojis at the bottom of your screen. So if you're very excited about what I'm presenting about, or you agree, if you want to respond at all, please feel free to use those emojis. And that way we'll make a much more engaging presentation. As you can see at the bottom of your screen, we have Spanish translation for those joining us who are preferring Spanish language. And so hopefully that's helpful to people. Make sure that you've got that visible. If you need to play around with your controls to make that happen, please do so. And then, like I said, at the end of today's webinar, you'll get an email thanking you for joining us, and it will also help you to understand where you can see the recording of the webinar. If you ever want to go back and watch again, if one time is just not enough for you, you can go ahead and watch that recording again. So thank you again for joining us. We're so excited to see everyone here. Really look forward to the conversation that we're going to have, and really hoping that it will be a conversation. So please do add any questions into the chat. Be ready to participate. Interesting conversation that we're going to have, and I look forward to exploring that with you. All right, so my name is Laurel Ramirez, and I have the honor of being the school director here at Academia Cotopaxi. This is my first year with Academia Cotopaxi, and I'm really enjoying the experience. I have 24 years of educational leadership experience, and that experience spans across 3 continents. So very typical kind of international educator traveling the world, have the privilege to experience just such beautiful and different educational models, and really enjoy having conversations about education. I'm currently pursuing a doctorate in educational innovation and reform, so those are topics that are especially interesting to me, and I have a completed minor already in educational leadership and policy studies. So if you really want to get nerdy about education, I'm always the person to talk to about that. I really enjoy having education conversations. So again, we're really grateful you're here, and hope that this is an interesting education conversation for you all as well. All right, so for today's agenda, we're going to talk a bit about belonging as it relates to children, and the importance of belonging for children, and the ways in which, as parents or educators or whatever background you bring into this webinar, you can support belonging in your children or in your students. We're also going to talk about the importance of healthy balance for children, and then fostering growth and confidence. So we've got some big topics we're going to cover. I hope that you'll learn something new. I also hope to learn something new from you. So like I said, please at any time, add into the chat. Let's make this a conversation. That's always much more meaningful. And to get that conversation started into the chat right now, I'm going to drop a question to you. It'd be great to know where people are joining us from. So if you can add that, that would be wonderful. And then something fun. What do you enjoy having for breakfast? So what's your favorite breakfast option? I'll add mine in as well. And if you're a native Spanish speaker, feel free to add that in Spanish as well. Very happy to see your responses in Spanish. So I'm from California. I love some eggs for breakfast. I love some protein. Chia pudding. That sounds delicious. We'll all get some new breakfast ideas from this chat. Oh, welcome from Quito, our neighbor there. Pancakes. Ooh, I also love kefir. Ay, patacones. When I lived in Costa Rica, we had a lot of patacones, so I can relate. Oh, delicious fruit. Ooh, avocado toast. Gosh, if you haven't had dinner yet, I'm sorry, because this question is going to make you hungry, I suppose. Glad to have someone joining us from Russia. Welcome. Ah, mexicano. Ay, unas buenas enfrijoladas, claro que sí. Okay, this is very much going to make us hungry. Wow, wonderful. So what we're learning here is that we all need to get together and have a bit of a buffet. We'll enjoy our breakfast together. Thank you so much for contributing. Really grateful for that. All right. So as you can imagine, what we eat and the way that we connect to the world is a huge sense of belonging. And it's an interesting thing to consider, kind of what has our background been, and then where do we find ourselves in the world, and how do those two things relate? Before we kind of jump into the main topics of today's webinar, you might be curious kind of what the vision is for Academia Cotopaxi learners as we kind of approach these topics as a school. Where are we at with these things? When we talk about education here at Academia Cotopaxi, we most consistently talk about the need to prepare our students for today, but also for those challenges and those opportunities that will come tomorrow and that are very unpredictable, right? So many of us grew up maybe in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, when there was less change and constant innovation and need to transition like there is today. We live in a very different moment. One of my favorite researchers is Caroline Shields, and she wrote an article in 2018 that was really interesting. I'm not sure those of you that might be interested with this VUCA kind of acronym, which typically involves considering these concepts of volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity. This is the world that we're in right now. We're constantly dealing with change and with relative instability and with an, as it says there, an uncertainty. Where are we going? What's going to happen? There's not the same predictability that maybe you or I as younger children at the ages of our students had when we were growing up. And what Carolyn Shields says is, there's an opportunity there to be able to really look at VUCA with a new kind of lens, right? And so if instead of thinking about volatility, we think about vision. If instead of thinking about uncertainty, we consider understanding. If instead of complexity, we seek clarity. And if instead of ambiguity, we really consider ourselves as agile, then we have that foresight and that insight and that action to be able to go forward into this very complex world that we now live in and to do so more successfully. And so we really are thinking about that a lot here at Academia Cotopaxi as a leadership team. We talk about this a lot because the world is happening around us and for our children as well. But the way that we respond to that and the way that we prepare ourselves to be able to adequately handle those challenges and those opportunities is something that we can control. So that's interesting to consider, right? And if we build a mindset where we're stronger, more adaptive, perhaps we create for our children a better and more positive future. So jumping into specifically this concept of belonging, there's a few areas I just want to kind of talk about it. And please add into the chat any questions that you have, any reactions. Very interested to know how this is resonating with you all. When we at Academia Cotopaxi think about belonging, we really think about this concept of connection. And when you look at the research on children, it's incredibly important that in a very globalized and interconnected and rapidly changing world, children have an anchor, right? An ability to connect to people and to place. And to know that they do truly like pertenecer, as we would say in Spanish, right? That they belong to a context and to a location and to a purpose. Connections intentionally, I've used the word there, foster. They must be fostered. A connection is not automatic. And so no matter where your child is, whether they're at home, out and about in their community, or very importantly at school where they spend a vast majority of their time, it's important that there's an intentionality of the connection that we're developing with children to be able to have positive relationships with others. I don't know if you've seen the research on loneliness, but there's an incredible loneliness pandemic right? Where people are growing into adulthood and not feeling sufficiently connected with friends, with family, or to their community. We really want to make sure that our students develop these skills and abilities to be able to connect with others. And again, there's an intentionality on the part of the school, on the part of teachers, on the part of the structures and general culture of the school to really reinforce that connection priority as a school. So that's something that we take very seriously. Now, the second point is using kind of a bit of an academic term, so bear with me. But it's incredibly important to emphasize and to nurture what's called ethnocultural heritage. And when we think about ethnocultural heritage, we live in an ever increasingly multicultural and multiracial society. So, way, way back before the technological age, people were much more kind of isolated within their respective communities, and there wasn't this kind of ongoing expectation and reality of a multicultural environment. And so there's a lot of resources and discourse about this. If you look into the research on this, to consider, to what extent is it valuable for me to connect to multiple cultures and to have these relationships and these friendships with other, and to what extent does my own tradition, does my own community, does my own language matter to a child? From a belonging perspective, tremendously, right? And so, for example, at international school where we are an English medium school, which is the case for many, many schools, it's incredibly important to still inculcate and reinforce the home language for the child, to show validity and caring for home culture. Because from a belonging perspective, for a child to be able to develop a personal identity that is rooted in their own ethnocultural background with connection and meaning across to other cultures is incredibly important. This gives them that rootedness, but also that kind of intention for thriving and for vision that extends beyond their direct periphery that is really, really important in their personal development. And so again, rooting in ritual and tradition is incredibly important. And this can happen in lots of different ways. So at schools, for example, we might do this in some interesting ways. One of the traditions that I really love at Academia Cotopaxi is on the first day of school, we do that welcome tunnel. For those of you that are parents here at Academia Cotopaxi, you've surely experienced that, where students are literally welcomed by a tunnel of adults in their lives, parents and teachers and staff members who are so happy to have them on campus. And this is a tradition that happens year to year. We had a student at the beginning of this year say, "Oh my gosh, the tunnel," and run through the tunnel like they knew, right? They had seen the tunnel the year before. This was a ritual and a tradition that happens at the school. And that helps to foster that sense of connection and belonging for children. This is also something really important for families to develop in the home, right? And this can look any way, that the rituals and the traditions, that you might have as a family are particular to your own family, right? There's no correct ritual or tradition. The importance is having some rituals and some traditions. So maybe you all get together as a family on Friday nights and you enjoy a home-cooked meal together, and there's conversation around the table, and maybe everyone's participating in developing that meal. And that's a tradition. That's something that your children can expect and they can count on and that they look forward to. That's a great example. There's many, many other examples. If you have an example that you want to drop in the chat, maybe you'll inspire other people for a wonderful tradition for your family. These are really important things for children. They're important whether they grow up in one location and never move throughout their childhood. They're also incredibly essential when a child is a globally mobile child, right? So for example, my children, just as I've worked across 3 continents, my children have lived across 3 continents. And no matter where we've been in the world, there are certain family traditions that have remained. And that helps children to feel rooted, right? That no matter where they are, there's things that they can count on, and there's ways that they can continue to feel connected to their family. So it's incredibly important. Okay, so this next point is an interesting one, and I think as a person living in this world with a phone that sometimes seems like an extension of my own hand, incredibly important to think about the investment in quality of time as a family. And again, the research on this is very clear. Presence matters. And so that doesn't mean like my physical body being with my children, but my mind, right? My engagement, being with my children. So it's important for all of us to put that phone down and put it away, and to engage with our children in a very intentional way. And this helps them to feel like they belong, that they matter, that they're important. And the research shows that this doesn't have to be an incredibly extensive amount of time. Not to say that it wouldn't be wonderful if it were. Spend as much time as you can with your children. But if you only take, for example, 5 or 10 minutes every evening to go lay down in bed with your kids before they go to sleep and have a bit of a chat and a snuggle, those are moments that help your child to feel reinforced on a regular basis that they belong in their family, that they're loved, that there's this moment that my mom or my dad or grandma, grandpa are going to come and they're going to talk to me and they're going to listen to me. And these are belonging rituals that are incredibly important. Unfortunately, with all the technology that we have nowadays, we can be a bit distracted, right? We can be with our children, but continually looking down at our phones, engaging in some way with technology and not engaging our children. So any amount of quality time you can invest, always really important. And it's something that we take very seriously at Academia Cotopaxi. That's why we have a no phone policy for our students. And we're in the process of implementing this with our teachers as well, so that there's really clear boundaries on when phones are welcome in our environment and really wanting people to connect, right? To have those face-to-face conversations, to see one another, and to have those meaningful connections. The last thing that I would say about belonging is it's incredibly important to foster open and healthy communication. As a mother of 3 teenagers, 2 young adults, this can be very challenging. Maybe it's only me who's challenged by this. But sometimes, we can be as parents a bit judgmental about the things that our children are saying, or we can have some reactions to the choices that they're making or the way that they're talking about something. And this can shut down that open communication, right? So we have to really think about every engagement that we have with our children. Am I inviting them to continue to share with me? Is the way that I'm engaging in this conversation sending the message that I really do want them to tell me everything, right? That I'm not expecting them to only tell me good things or only things that I want to hear, but that I'm there as a supportive parent. Not to say that you're not setting boundaries, because boundaries are incredibly important and children need boundaries, right? From a safety and security standpoint, children feel happier and healthier when they have really clear boundaries set upon them by their parents and by schools. But it also means that you're able to create a space of trust with your children, that they know that they can come to you, right? No matter what, no matter if they've made an enormous mistake, no matter if it's something they think you might be very disappointed about, that you want them to come to you, and that open and healthy communication is something that's modeled. I know, again, for me as a parent, I've not always been the best at this. I think it can be super tricky when your kiddos come to you with something that's incredibly disappointing. How do you continue to hold kind of space to be a good listener and to really measure your words before you respond? But it is something that research shows is incredibly important. So I encourage that in myself and I encourage that in you as well. All right, so let's talk about healthy balance. And this is an interesting one, again, given the world that we're in, right? Where we've shifted parenting and education perspective to a bit of what's referred to in the literature as overscheduling or snowplow parenting, or just an intensity of parenting that child psychologists are very clear on is not preferable. And so please allow me to encourage in you, and then you can go back and tell your spouse, encourage in your friends that these are the healthy ways to go about raising children and to taking care of young people. Routines are incredibly important, right? I cannot reinforce enough the importance of sleep. All of us, including us on this call, I hope that you get a good solid 8 to 10 hours of sleep. That would be amazing. I know I don't get that, but I endeavor to get that. Incredible amounts of sleep are really important. That's when your brain kind of rests and make connections. For children whose brains are still developing, incredibly, incredibly important to sleep. And so sometimes as parents, we need to just be mindful of the activities that we're organizing and the ways that we're going about our just family dynamic, right? Am I setting my child child up for this expectation that sleep routines matter. One of the biggest pieces of advice that you'll hear from doctors and from the research is that a consistent sleep routine matters, right? And so having one sleep routine during the week when school's in session and a completely different sleep routine on the weekends is not recommendable. Now, there might be times that you're heading to a family wedding, there's something really important, it's a special moment. Those are traditions as a family that should be valued. So it's not to say that you never deviate from that, but trying to get your child onto a value of consistent sleep will help them tremendously. And that's something to start from the time they're very young. And then if you do so by the time they're older, they're going to be much more prone to kind of respect and to value that sleep as well, right? Sleep is really, really important. Nutrition is incredibly important as well. And that's a pretty obvious one. I think nowadays parents are very aware of that. But being mindful of the sugar intake that your children have is incredibly important. Sugar is a bit of a drug, right? And we can become addicted to it. And so being mindful of the quantity of sugar that your child is intaking will help them to feel better. And then by ende, sometimes I don't know the words in English, will help your child to be a happier child, right? And so thinking a lot about the food that they're consuming is incredibly important. And it's not to say that they wouldn't have some snacks and some fun things that maybe are not their normal fare, but really, really considering, are they getting enough protein and are they getting vegetables and fruits that help their body to thrive and that help their brain to develop? Really, really important. Physical activity is a really interesting one. I remember when I was young, they used to say 30 minutes of mild activity a day. It's up to an hour of rigorous physical activity a day is the recommendation. And really we have to question ourselves and wonder, right, are we doing that? Are we doing that as adults? And are we ensuring that in our children? It's important, right? Having sufficient movement so that we're not overly sedentary, incredibly important. So really considering the activities that your child's engaging in, and are they being physically active enough? It's recommended that children up to the age of 25 develop as much muscle as they possibly can. That's a time when their muscles will develop in a way that after the age of 25, it's not possible to develop. So it's not that they all have to go be bodybuilders, but we do want them to get to the point where they're having these strong bodies. And from a girl self-esteem standpoint, it's focusing on that, right? On the health and strength of a body and the value of that for everyone, for children and for us as adults. A really big topic is busyness. Nowadays, in this kind of over-parenting world that we're in, we can be a bit too overstructured in the way that we consider our children's time, right? So I'll take the busyness and unstructured time as kind of 2 points together. You need to be able to find a balance, and we try and do this at school, between the amount of time that your child is productive and engaged in really positive activities, and then the amount of unstructured time they have, because that rest and that boredom that leads to creativity are incredibly important. And I remember when I was a kid, my mom used to say, she'd push me out the door and she'd say, come back when it's dark. Right. And she didn't know what I was doing all day. Of course, I grew up in the 80s. Maybe that was an 80s thing. But I was out and about all day, and I was determining what I was doing during that day, right? And I was finding a way to engage my time. There's a really good amount of brain development in the creativity that comes from a lack of structure. So as a parent, really thinking, right, when are the times that I want to structure my child's time, and when are the times that I'm going to value that unstructured time is something really important to consider. Now, when you're looking at teenagers, what I always say, and what I would tell you after 24 years of working with students, a busy child is a well-behaved child. I would limit the amount of time that you have your teenagers out and about making up their activities, because heaven help us what those activities might be. It's always a good thing to make sure that your child's engaged as much as possible in really positive structures. And that's why at schools like ours, we're providing as many opportunities as we can for after-school activities, for extended learning, leadership, clubs, positive activities that children can engage in that make sure that they're avoiding risky behaviors. And that's always an important thing in adolescent development, especially. Now, the last point here is one that is very, very close to my heart. You really want to make sure that your children have enough true challenge. Now, what do I mean by true challenge? You want to make sure that your child is able to struggle. So, for example, if you have a little one, maybe a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, maybe they want to put their clothes on by themselves. And as we all know, as any parents who've done that, that can sometimes be a very slow and inefficient process, as they're not quite sure, like, which hole do I put my arm through and how do I get this over my head? But it's an incredible and an important process in their growth and development in being able to be as autonomous as possible. And it's a challenge that for a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old is a very appropriate challenge. And if they put that shirt on backwards, still celebrate that, right? They struggled through that notion of getting their shirt on, and they were successful in getting it on, even if it's inside out or it's backwards. We can all fix those things, but that challenge is really good for them. The more that they're challenged in those very developmentally appropriate ways, the more confidence that they have in themselves. And that is the next topic that we want to kind of begin to talk about, that importance of building confidence in your children. I remember when we used to live in Central America, I had a student and we were kind of cleaning the classroom. Everybody had kind of brooms and little dustpans. And my student had no idea how to hold the broom. She just had no idea. She was holding it in the weirdest way I've ever seen someone hold a broom. And I was watching her and I was thinking, gosh, what is she doing? And then she looked up at me and she said, Maestra, I've never used a broom before. I don't know how to sweep, right? And she was in fourth grade, right? Fourth grade, and she had no idea how to sweep a floor. And I thought, oh, goodness, right? And she didn't feel very confident in herself, right? Because this is a very basic task that we want to make sure that children are able to do. And that's exactly why, as parents, instead of having helpers who support everything that our children do, we need to also have times where our children do things on their own, right? Where they're gathering up their own dirty clothes, where they're washing their dishes, where they're sweeping the floor, because all of these tasks help us to feel independent, and they help us to feel strong, and they help us to feel confident. And it really broke my heart to watch her lack that confidence in a very basic task. And she was watching everyone else have all of this confidence. We don't want to set our children up for circumstances where they're going to feel that way. So it's something really important to think about. And for every family, that's going to be different, right? So you'll have to have a bit of a think about, in your family, what are ways in which you can kind of support that really important true struggle. Now, one of the ways that you can do that is by deprivatizing your own challenges. And this is something that we do as teachers here at Academia Cotopaxi, but it's also something that I would really encourage you all to do as parents. So for example, I was just this past week, I traveled to the US to present my own research as a doctoral student at a research conference. And I'd never done that before. And I did feel nervous about that, right? That was a new experience. I felt nervous. One of the things that I was very intentional about is that I said that to my children. I right now have a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old at home. And I had a very explicit conversation with them. I said, gosh, I feel so nervous about my presentation. Everyone that's going to be there is so smart. I worry, gosh, that they're going to ask me a question that I don't know the answer to. And then I just feel like a little bit anxious. And then make sure that you tell them what you're doing about that. So because I feel nervous, I said to them, I'm just really going to go over those keywords as much as I can beforehand and make sure I'm ready for any questions people might ask. And I'm going to review it the night before, and then I'm just going to take a deep breath and I'm going to do my best. Right? And so I'm deprivatizing my experience for my children. I'm helping them understand that as adults, we also feel nervous, right? We also go into things and we feel unsure and we're not entirely confident that what we're about to embark upon is something that we're going to be successful at. I think especially in a role like mine, where I'm a school director, I go and I give presentations on a regular basis. If I don't deprivatize my conversation and my thinking with my children, they could begin to think that nothing ever phases me, right? That it's always easy for me. And for them, it's not easy. And so there must be something wrong with them. Whereas you and I all know, no, I also struggle, right? I also think about things and worry about them. But if I don't say that out loud to my children, how would they ever know? So I really encourage you to think about the areas in which you yourself are struggling. And, if you have little kids, it can even be like silly things, right? Like not taking yourself too seriously. Maybe you're tying your shoe and you can't get that shoe to tie correctly. You say, oh my goodness, look at me. just can't even tie my shoe this morning, right? What is wrong with me? Well, that's okay. I'm just going to take a deep breath and I'm going to try again. And what your children hear when you do that is that mistakes are normal and it's an opportunity to learn and it's okay, right? We all make mistakes. We all are working on things and it's okay. And that helps your children be able to approach risk taking with much more confidence. Because in the end, we want children to take risks. Now, if you know me well, you know that I don't mean any kind of risky risk. Like drinking or drugs or any of the bad things. I don't mean that. But I do mean trying things that I'm not good at, right? Looking at something that I think is going to be an enormous challenge and having the confidence to give it a go and to really think, I want to try this. I want to be able to do it. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to run for student body president. I'm going to go sit at a table with people I don't know and introduce myself and try and make new friends. There are so many ways that we can take risks. If we as adults are modeling that for our children, we're talking about the risks that we're taking and the times that it works out and the times that it doesn't, that helps our children to understand that that's normal, right? And so it's okay if everything that I do is not perfect all the time. It's all right. We want that struggle to happen and we're deprivatizing that struggle. Now, speaking of struggle, please, please, please allow your children to struggle. We are in a moment in our history of incredible overprotection and over sheltering of our children. And this is not good for them, right? They do need to be able to confront difficulties without being saved from that challenge, right? So there's this concept, I don't know if you've heard it, of snowplow parenting. I know we don't get a tremendous amount of snow here in Quito at least, but maybe where you are in the world, you get snow. But it's that idea, a snowplow moves ahead of the people pushing all of the snow out of the way. Snowplow parenting is that you're moving ahead of your child and you're preventing any struggle. You're just pushing struggles out of the way. You're avoiding that any challenge ever comes. And of course, the risk of that is that children might believe that challenge doesn't exist, or heaven forbid, they're quite old by the time a real challenge comes and they have no skill set to deal with that challenge, right? So it's best if children are faced with normal challenge throughout their lives and throughout their days so that they get really good at working through challenge. And when we shelter and overprotect too much, we avoid challenge, and challenge is good. Now, the perfect amount of challenge, right? And I think we all have seen children who are suffering tremendously and it's way too much challenge, right? That's an imbalance on the other end. So by no means am I am I encouraging that, but it can be an issue on the other end as well, right? Where we don't provide a space and an opportunity for sufficient challenge. It's probably the number one thing my husband and I talk about. Great concern that heaven forbid our children don't struggle enough, right? He and I both grew up with much more challenging childhoods and just more challenging circumstances. And what if our children are not having sufficient challenge? It's something to consider. And so how can we kind of set up abilities for them to have that productive challenge? That's something to think about. Also to focus on, and this can be a tricky one because we all love a product, right? We all celebrate that Olympic gold medal or that Abanderado award, all of these products that all of us know have taken a tremendous amount of time to arrive in this culminating moment of celebration. Incredibly important to, instead of only celebrating those culminating moments when it's very obvious that it's very exciting and we want to encourage our children, also to celebrate the process, right? So that children understand that when they see someone incredible who is accomplishing things that, they can't even imagine, that person also went through a process, right? There was a long period of time, likely. There were struggles, there were successes, there were failures, and that process is what matters most, right? Because through the process is where we learn. That culmination of the process that we hope might be positive, but sometimes it's not, right, is also an amazing thing to learn from. That's where we build that resilience and where we have that kind of inner strength and that fortitude to be able to face challenges, understanding that I'm just in the midst at any given time of a longer process. And I can do processes. I know how to break things down. I know how to continue to give effort. I know how to continue to work. And I will eventually, get to a destination, but the destination is not my goal. The goal is to continue to grow and learn as I move along. The last thing I would say about this priority of fostering growth and confidence in our students and in our children is really supporting your child to find a passion. And again, this is where I think as a parent, it can be a bit tricky. I always joke with my friends that I always wanted to be a dancer, and I never could become a dancer. So then I always secretly hoped my children would become dancers, which was, of course, just me wanting to fulfill my dancing dreams. But I think this can happen to us as parents, right? We really enjoy something, or we really always wanted for something. And then all of a sudden I have these children and I want them to then do that, right? Or I think it would be so great if they engaged in piano. But the truth of the matter is they cry every single time they go to piano. They hate the piano. It's the most torturous thing ever, right? So where is that balance in kind of having these goals and these objectives and these hopes and these dreams for our children, while also really authentically listening to them, paying very close attention to what they're showing very natural interest and passion in, and then really supporting that passion. As teachers, we try and do that. We have a very inquiry-driven model here at Academia Cotopaxi, so we're always watching and listening and paying attention to what children are interested in, and we'll kind of steer the learning in that direction to really try and align with their natural interests. As parents, we can do that as well, right? So you might be noticing your little one and they're just drawing constantly. They love to color and to draw. They can't get enough of it. And so maybe you look for an art opportunity, right? To be able to try out a different form of art, or to have the opportunity to learn a little bit more technique. So really allowing your child to lead and to guide you in where their passion lies is an incredibly positive thing. And it's not like children need to have a passion from a very early age. Some children will very naturally kind of go through life. They'll go through early childhood, they'll go through elementary, and they really don't have a strong passion. There's things they like. They're engaged in lots of activities. It's positive. But if you as a parent were to be asked, well, what's your child's passion? You're like, oh, they don't have a passion. Don't worry. That is very normal. Oftentimes we see that as well with kind of high school students, and it's such a big moment as high school is about to begin, where it's that time of kind of considering, well, what do I want to study? Some kiddos are so clear, right? Like, I want to be a doctor. I already know that. And they've known that from the time they were very young. And without fail, we have high schoolers who still don't know. I don't know. I like this, but I also like that. They haven't identified a really concrete passion. That's also okay, right? We're all kind of on a journey, but as much as we can all pay attention and try and reinforce and encourage passions, the more confidence this develops in our children, and the more we foster their ongoing growth and development. So that's incredibly important. All right, I leave you with one of my favorite quotes. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Angela Duckworth. She's very interesting. She's a renowned psychologist, one of the most famous psychologists in the world. She's written very interesting books. She's also a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and she's an author. She's very famous for her research on this concept of grit. And I think actually one of her books is called Grit. Incredibly interesting. And she talks a lot about just this notion of perseverance and resilience. And one of the things that she says that I always think about is when you think about grit, right? And I want to be a gritty person. I want to be known for my grit. Well, it's really about doing the hard work day in and day out without immediate reward. And in the end, that's what it comes down to for us as adults and for children as well, right? The grit is that persevering over time. It's not the immediate reward for every single thing that I do. So if I'm interested in something, if I want to explore and develop that, I have to keep doing that hard work day in and day out, and I'm not expecting an immediate reward. So it's something to consider, something to think about as we continue to support our students, but also as you continue to support your children. So a lot of times we get this question of, well, how is this happening at Academia Cotopaxi? So I'm going to show you just a very short video about how we foster belonging, and then we'll come back for Q&A.
You belong at Academia Cotopaxi, where dreams take flight and futures are shaped in the heart of our vibrant community. Every child isn't just a student here. They're a cherished member of our family. Our dedicated teachers are more than educators. They are architects of dreams, shaping young minds with passion and dedication. Get ready for innovative education that goes beyond textbooks. From their first steps into our classrooms, students feel a calling to be a part of something greater than themselves, becoming passionate learners who embrace the journey of discovery. For parents, Academia Cotopaxi isn't just a school. It's the assurance that their children are embraced, nurtured, and loved. Our sense of community extends beyond these walls, creating a global connection that starts in Ecuador and reaches every corner of the world. We believe in the power of education to make a difference. But more than that, we believe in the power of belonging. You belong as something extraordinary wherever we may be, but particularly in a learning community. When we belong, we thrive, we inspire, and we can shape futures for ourselves, our loved ones, our community, and the world. This is Academia Cotopaxi, where you belong, where we all belong, together. Join our community where we all belong.
All right. So that's a little bit of how we approach belonging as a school. If you're a member of our community, I'm sure you've experienced that. If you're interested in learning more about the school, we have an open house this Saturday. So if you take your phone out and scan that QR, you can register to attend the open house. This open house is specifically focused on early childhood students up to up to age 7. So anyone from 12 months of age to age 7, that's the focus that we're delivered this open house. There will be other open houses in the future that focus on other grade levels. So really encourage you to join us if you're interested. And then I'll leave as our final page here, just the information about our upcoming webinar that's going to be in about a month's time on November 11th. We're going to be talking a little bit more about identity and belonging in a global context, which is going to be wonderful. I'm really, really looking forward to that. But for now, I'm going to stop share. And I'm going to open it up for any questions. We've got about 10 minutes here to be able to consider some questions that people might have. So if there's anyone with questions, please go ahead and let us know what those questions are, and we will make sure to address them. And I'm going to just go ahead and open up the chat so that I can see that as well and see if we've got any questions that popped into the chat. All right. And at this time, you can also raise your hand and unmute and ask those questions as well. So any questions, anything that this conversation had you thinking about? Yeah, Academia Cotopaxi.
Well, thank you so much for this topic. It's been great. And I was just reading some of the comments made by some parents, and we live in a world where instant reward it's so available, right? So we compete with this idea of like I need this or I want this, and we get everything in an instant time, right? So how do we cope with that? How do we compete with that? And how do we, you know, um, teach our kids that instant reward might take a couple of, extra tries, and so it's very difficult. And I think Lorena Carrillo also mentioned like screens, right? So technology making life so easy. What would be your suggestion as we compete with this immediate world?
Yeah.
Where reward is so easily
Yes,
accessed.
true. No, it's a very good question. And I think we all struggle with that, right? I mean, it's a very rare home, the home that is free of technology. And so this is an instant reward mechanism. I was reading an article the other day that called the telephone the social pacifier, right? If I'm feeling uncomfortable, I can just look at my telephone and I don't have to engage in the world around me, right? And you watch it with children, right? Where they're, TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever it is they're watching, it changes so quickly, right? There's an attention span challenge that's being reinforced by the algorithms within the technology that our children are engaging with. And so it's a challenge. For me, it's twofold. There needs to be really important determined limits and boundaries set on children. So we do that here at Academia Cotopaxi by not allowing phones, right? Phones are not allowed at school. Children do not have their phones on them. They do not engage in their phones during the school day. And that is a strict boundary done for a purpose. And it's not only us that's doing that. I mean, it's a very common practice in schools around the world. At home, please also consider those boundaries. So a very common boundary setting opportunity for homes is to not have electronic devices in personal spaces, to have those only in shared spaces. And that can be a great way as a parent to be able to supervise what's happening on those personal devices, and more importantly, the amount of time spent on those personal devices. Because again, the research and the medical recommendation on this is very clear, that there should be no use of any technology up until a very much later age than you would imagine. I think it's 4 or 5 years of age that they recommend any screens at all. And if you think about the way that we're raising children nowadays, that is very much often not the case. And then from there on, the limits that are set, right? And really just not encouraging an overconsumption of these tools and devices that are reinforcing this idea that I need to constantly be rewarded, right? I need to constantly get myself pleased by what's in front of me instead of having space and time to consider. So both setting up that boundary and that structure, but then also replacing, right? So what are we doing instead? If we're not sitting on technology and we're not consumed by our devices, how are we reinforcing this idea that it's good to go through a process and I don't need to constantly have a reward at the end of that? So it's kind of twofold in that way. So I see a question in the chat about reducing loneliness in kids. And yeah, that's very interesting. It's more and more common, right? If we look back in history around the world, families used to have 10, 12, 8 children, right? I mean, there were these huge families. And I don't come from a huge family, but I can only imagine an immediate social group just within your own nuclear family to have that quantity of siblings. And nowadays, we have a population reduction from a birth standpoint. So families are having fewer and fewer children. And that means a lot of only children. And so, yeah, how do we support that potential of loneliness for only children or for those transitioning into teenage years? Really, really good question. Thank you so much for that, Mabel. Again, as a family, having those really strong family connections are incredibly important. So if you have only one child, having a closeness with your child between the parents in the family and the child, incredibly helpful, because their children will go through moments of time when friendships will lessen, right? Where there might be reasons for why they're not as connected to their peers, and being able to always return to a very strong family unit is very, very healthy for children, because we make friends and then we can stop being as good of friends and then we make new friends again. So there can be natural kind of ebbs and flows in friendships, but family is that structure that remains. So first and foremost, kind of really reinforcing what we talked about before of having those really positive relationships with your children, incredibly important. But you don't want to be the only structure for your children. So especially if you've got kiddos transitioning or who are only children, being deliberate about those opportunities that you're setting up for them to be able to engage with others, and doing that from a very young age is really important. Having your children in a preschool program is incredibly helpful in that way. If you think about our Imagine preschool program with 12 months old coming in, they're just babies, right? They're so little. But when they come in at that age, even when they're in that stage of parallel play, they're around these peers and you have that opportunity to develop friendships. And that's really, really special, really beautiful. So if that's available to your family, taking that up as an option can also be really helpful. And then, with teenagers, goodness me, one of the biggest pieces of advice I would provide to any parent is that often we'll see in education that parents will be incredibly present and involved in their children's lives when they're in early childhood, when they're in elementary school. And then as children transition into the teenage years, they want more independence. They're very friend focused, right? They want to spend a lot of time with their friends. And sometimes parents will perceive that that's then a moment to withdraw a bit from that relationship with their children, to give them space, right? They don't need me as much. Quite the opposite. They have never needed you more. There is a saying that we have in education, little people, little problems, big people, big problems, right? When they get into those teenage years, sometimes those dilemmas and those struggles that they face are bigger than they can sometimes handle on their own, whether it's a friendship challenge or, a first, boyfriend, girlfriend relationship, whatever it might be. Those social challenges and those social dynamics can be incredibly variable for kiddos that age, and having parents who are still deeply involved and finding those ways to connect is incredibly helpful. So again, that family relationship is just really, really important. So I see a question about the topic of inclusion with children with special educational needs. I'm assuming, Paola, but feel free to unmute, that you're referring to the school and how we as a school include children with special needs. So, fundamentally, all schools should be inclusive schools. All of us, whether we're aware of it or not, have some disability, is something that I just learned from a colleague in my doctoral class, which I thought was a really good thing to note, right? So we all have challenges that we're facing, and spaces for learning. It's important that they're open and welcoming to all. It's also really important from an empathy and development of identity and understanding of compassion for everyone, to be able to have experiences with a wide variety of people, right? And to be able to understand that we're all very, very different. So as a school, we have an incredibly strong inclusion model. We welcome children with a wide variety of special educational needs, and that's incredibly important to us. And one of the areas that we're really focusing on a lot this year is children who are talented and gifted or high achieving, which is a special educational need, but one that is sometimes less focused on in schools. And interestingly, oftentimes parents will think, oh, I really want my child to be gifted. That would be incredible. What a gift, right? If they were able to be, really, really talented in something. Yes, and I would tell you that oftentimes children who are talented and gifted have great disparities, right? They might have really, really strong abilities in some areas and incredibly strong deficiencies in others. And so they are children who need special care and attention. And so we're, as a school, really focusing on that a lot this year, after having years and years of really strong and incredible support of children with special educational needs. Oh, goodness. Jenny, I'm loving your question. So, always, maybe the scariest thing your child can say to you is, I want to be an artist. And you think, oh, no, that doesn't sound like a stable profession. Yeah, that's really, really tricky, isn't it? What is it that Chris Rock says? You can be anything that you want to be as long as you're good at it and they're hiring. But I do think that's correct, right? I think sometimes for these artistic professions that anyone might want to pursue, how does that make a living for you? One of the things that we do from a college counseling perspective in schools is that we really focus with children on kind of, how can I follow my passions and my dreams, but how can I also be pragmatic about what that means, right? Because that can come in many ways. So it might be that I want to be an artist, but there's really not any money and pay in that, and I do need to consider that. But it can also be that I want to be a doctor, but I'm actually not a very good student, right? And there are kind of correlations that need to go together, right? So you're not likely to pass that MCAT or be successful in medical school if you're not, tackling successfully your math class in high school. So there can be kind of some reality conversations to have with children. But what a wonderful thing to have an art passion, right? I think a passion in music is also equally valuable. So finding a way to really encourage that, but having those kind of down-to-earth, pragmatic conversations with your children, I think is incredibly helpful. Good luck with that, Jenny, with your artistic, talented child. Oh, interesting. That I like that question, Andrea. Thank you so much. So some examples of how the sense of belonging to a community promotes innovation and creativity. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the research on a sense of belonging, right, and that importance of fostering that in children, when you feel like you belong, and frankly, I mean, we're talking about children, but this is for adults as well, right? If I feel like I belong somewhere, I feel very safe, right? And within a space of safety, my mind has the ability to be creative, and I can think divergently because I'm not afraid of what judgments might come or the ways in which people might respond to that way that I'm thinking, because I know that I exist in a space where there's trust and there's love and there's support. So it's a fundamental and foundational need that we all have to feel like we're within a space and a community that welcomes us and that nurtures us and that loves us. And really, it's only within that space that we can then have the openness to think about things differently, right? And to really kind of come up with an idea that maybe no one's thought of before, or to really creatively continue to consider something in a new direction with that safety that I'm not going to be ridiculed, or I'm not going to be judged, or I'm not going to be criticized. So it's a foundational component of then being able to be innovative and creative, which in this day and age, incredibly important. We do need children to be able to have that ability. Oh, well, thank you all so much. I really am grateful for your questions, so grateful for your presence this evening. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're heading up on the 8 o'clock hour for us here in Quito, so about an hour of joining one another today. I, again, really encourage you to join us at our next session. We're planning to hold these webinar series pretty much monthly for the rest of the year. So also, if there's any topics that interest you, you're going to get an email from our team. If there's anything you'd like us to focus on, any topics that you're really interested in, we'd love to get that feedback. That would be incredible. And so thank you. Thank you so much. We're appreciative for your presence tonight, and we wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Miss Laurel. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you very much.